We talk a lot about the inner child, but the truth is we don't just have an inner child. We have inner children. A lot of parts work is based, at least in part, on IFS. And IFS stands for Internal Family Systems. And it's based on this idea that we have this whole internal family structure, that we have this inner parent, and we have all these little inner part babies that need our attention. And when they don't get that, they really grab at our attention and try to get us to focus on them. And when we aren't attuned enough to hear their need when it arises, they get louder and louder, until we can no longer ignore the fact that there is an unmet need that the inner parent is being asked to show up for. Or if a part doesn't trust the inner parent to do that, it will just take over and make decisions for you and steer your life. And this is when we end up doing things or saying things that we regret because it wasn't coming from this wise inner parent place, this centered, grace-filled, loving place. It was coming instead from one of these younger, fragmented pieces of us that exist still in the nervous system, in the body. So what I thought I would do for today's video is describe an exercise that you can do to get familiar with your parts, or at least a good number of them, and get to know them a little bit better. So for this exercise, you want to take a piece of paper and turn it the horizontal way. You can even take a couple pieces of paper and tape them together because you're going to want to create a timeline. So draw a long line across that paper. Once you have that line drawn, you want to label it like a ruler, starting with the age you were where you have your earliest memories and proceeding all the way up till about age 20, age 18. So marking the end of childhood, the beginning of adulthood. So you want to sort of encompass all of your early years, and we'll leave the rest off of this particular timeline. We're going to focus on those early years. Once you have that timeline drawn out, you're going to want to take some time to reflect, because this part is going to ask you to reflect back on your history. Take your time, because that can be intense, that can be a process. Doesn't need to happen all in one day, but over time fill in this timeline with key memories that you have about key events that happened that you know shaped you in some way. So you're going to want to hit the major highlights. Let's say at the age of 5, your family relocated, or at the age of 8, your sibling was born, or at the age of 15, your parents got a divorce, or whatever. You want to hit the major highlights. But in addition to these external events, also include moments in time in your history when you know there was an internal shift that happened, even if there wasn't an external event that was associated with that. So sometimes adolescence is a time where people can really relate to this, because it's not necessarily that always that something changed on the outside, but there were hormonal changes happening that really created a new shift in the sense of self, in the body, in our development. Once you have that timeline filled out with those key events, it doesn't have to be details, just labels, so like parents' divorce or something like that, then you want to go back through your timeline, and with every single labeled area, you want to reflect on what aspect of you that incident or that change brought forward. In other words, what inside of you was born as a result of that incident or that change? Because now what we're getting at is we're identifying the part that emerged at that time in order to navigate that period in your life. What aspect of you had to come on board in order to make that transition more doable, more survivable, whatever the case may be. So label each one with its part descriptor. So it might be the perfectionist, or it might be, the overachiever, or the angry part, or it doesn't have to be a fancy name, just something that comes to mind that describes this aspect of you that was brought online by that key central experience in your life. Once you have each part descriptor written down, you're going to jot down a few things underneath that. The first thing you want to jot down is, what is this part's fear? If it could speak to you, what would it say its biggest fear is? And related to that, what is its main goal? So biggest fear and main goal. After that, you want to feel into what this part would say it tends to do as a result of that fear and that goal. What sort of habits and strategies has it decided it needs to employ because of those two things? And finally, for each one, you want to jot down, what is that part's unmet needs that, if met, would alleviate their fear? So we'll walk through an example. Let's take a high-performing part. This would be an example of a part that puts a lot of expectations of being successful in the nervous system for that person. The fear of this part might be the fear of not being enough, not being good enough. The goal of this part might be something like to prove its worth through achievement. What they do as a result of that fear and that goal might be a whole host of things, like minimizing their feelings, wearing a mask, fearing being authentic in exchange for appearing a certain way that would be seen as successful, minimizing the need for rest, and so on and so forth. There might be a whole cluster of activities that this part could have adopted in order to cope with that fear and in order to meet its goal. Then you want to reflect on the unmet needs that this part might have had that caused it to come online to begin with. Those might be things like to know and be connected with their true inner worth, to be extended unconditional love, to be comfortable with failure and to not have their success tied to a loved one's approval. So you'd want to do this with each part that is labeled on your timeline, and that can take a while. So go slow. Let this be a process of really becoming more intimately and authentically familiar with aspects of yourself as a way of getting to know yourself better through the process. And while that alone is really helpful, there are so many more reasons why this activity can be very healing and useful. For example, just by attuning to all of these details of a particular part, you're sending the message from inner parent to this part that they are worthy of getting to know. They are worthy of being known and of being seen. Every single detail that you acknowledge and write down in answer to these questions requires attunement to this part. And that is healing in and of itself. If this part were a child, getting to know a child at this level would require a lot of beautiful things like eye contact and deep conversation and curiosity and all of that exchange that is healing magic in and of itself. So the process of this activity allows you to pour all of that nurturance and attention and care into each part. And they may be starving for that. So just the process of doing this fills an unmet need already. Another really beautiful thing that comes out of this, though, is that then when you feel a certain way later on in the week, you can do a little check-in with yourself and inquire which part is being activated right now. Now that I know more about these parts, when they arise with a need in your body, you can feel into which part is this, and once you identify that, you can also start to provide some of what you already know it needs. You can speak to their fear that you're already aware of because you did the work of getting to know it. So let's say, wow, my high performance part is really loud today. What does that mean? Well, it means I need to make contact first. But then what do I know about this part? Oh, it fears not being enough. I need to remember to reassure it that it is enough. I know that its goal is to prove my worth, and that's why it's acting in these ways. You can extend understanding because of that, and a lot of grace and care. And because you know its unmet needs, you can target that part specifically by providing it with its unmet needs. For example, one of the unmet needs that we talked about for this part was to be extended unconditional love, love that is not linked with high performance. You can provide this part with that specific need using the inner parent, pouring unconditional love into this part, reminding this part of you that your love and care as inner parent is not contingent on performance. And in all the ways that you can communicate that message, reassuring this part that you are available to be a support through the triggering of these needs until the nervous system settles back down and it starts to feel safe again. As you do this work, you might start to gather more information about what it needs. Just making contact when a part is active, you can start to inquire inwardly in each moment of trigger and ask, what are your needs today? What can I do? Is there something that you would like for me to say or to do on your behalf or for you? And in the process of feeling into that answer, you add to what you know about this part as unmet need or specific ways that this part likes to be soothed. In other words, the process of getting to know these parts is ongoing. This activity with the timeline is just a way to kickstart that process, but then it's maintained by you knowing more about the part and being able to make regular and routine contact with each part when they are triggered and grab at you for your awareness and attention. Each of those moments can become moments where you add to this knowledge base, just like you would for a child. Each moment of connection, each moment of assistance and care builds on on the relationship and you become more and more intimately familiar with what a particular child needs from you, this is very much the same kind of work. All of that being said, I just want to add a disclaimer. If you have trauma in your history, you want to move very slowly through this process and give yourself a lot of space and grace to modify as needed. For example, you could choose to leave off particular events from your timeline initially because they may be too flooding or too triggering, or you may not feel ready to include them in this activity. You could always come back and add those elements later, but you could start off with events and experiences that are a little less intense. So scaffold your experience in a way that doesn't flood your nervous system, because remember, the goal is not to be super triggering. It's actually to learn how to deal with triggers differently. Just the process of reflecting on your history when parts have come online and why could trigger the part. So if that happens, step away from the activity, give yourself a lot of grace and a lot of care and a lot of nurturance. Come back to the activity when you're ready. There truly is no rush. Because this kind of work really targets nervous system repair and nervous system support, it's really important to be aware that one of the things that really help the nervous system the most is slowness, things that don't feel like they are a rush. The energy of gentle, steady progress and resting as needed. And this is across all aspects of life, including with this assignment. So this is not something to power through. This is not something to apply grit to. It's something instead to practice allowing ease and flow and gentle care, and to infuse that into how you approach the work to begin with. If you have a therapist, you could even ask to do this work with them in session, and that can be a really supportive way to do this. I hope this was helpful in some way. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll be back with a new video soon. Bye.